Welcome to the Hungry Heracross, where we rank, analyse and create all things Zelda and Pokemon. Whether it's to obtain a tablet, a sacred flame, or the Triforce, all of the dungeons in Skyward Sword provide a fun and interesting challenge. Some of these levels are widely considered to be up there with the greatest in the series, but should they be? Well, in today's video, I'm going to be discussing each of these dungeons, highlighting the strengths and weaknesses of each, as I rank them from worst to best. For this ranking, I'm considering the level's design, theme, enemies, and items. I'm only looking at the main ones today, so I won't be exploring the mini dungeons such as the Pirate Stronghold. But before we get started, if you do enjoy this video, please give it a like and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future Zelda or Pokemon videos that I make. With all that out the way, we've got 7 dungeons to rank, so let's jump to it. The Fire Sanctuary is far from a bad dungeon, but it's still my least favourite in Skyward Sword. The second fire-themed level you play through involves several puzzles themed on manipulating the volcanic lava to your benefit. There's a lot of fun baiting the fiery hands to raise you to certain sections of the level, but trying to flick the water bulbs to extinguish flames and create platforms can become frustrating. The pinnacle of this fire theme comes towards the end of the dungeon when you release a stream of lava and have to quickly scurry out before it engulfs you. It brings a sense of epicness to an otherwise middle-of-the-road dungeon. There's also an incredible moment right before this where you need to take a leap of faith, diving into the throat of the volcano to land on a hidden platform. A definite highlight. Another key theme of this dungeon is saving the Mogmas, who are trapped in various rooms. Early in the level, Silver, one of said creatures, gives you the Mogma Mitts, requesting you to help save his buddies. The new item forces you to burrow underground to solve block pushing puzzles, and it's used a lot through most rooms in the Sanctuary. Whilst I think it works in that final lava chase mentioned earlier, I generally dislike all the other underground sections, and moving around below the surface is easily my least favourite gameplay element in this specific title. It doesn't help that the soundtrack for this dungeon is just okay and the boss battle is a little underwhelming. It means that even though this dungeon looks great, especially the outer sections, it just falls short of all the other levels in this game. Skykeep is the original chamber dungeon with 8 unique rooms that you maneuver around on a slide puzzle. The different areas that you shuffle are all based thematically on dungeons that you've already completed. For the most part, these work really well as self-contained puzzles reminiscent of most final dungeon gauntlets in other Zelda titles. Thankfully, you only have to do each main puzzle once because you've got the option to activate a shortcut once you've completed an area. This makes moving through the same room less of a chore, especially if you've got to repeat it if you get stuck with the overarching slide puzzle and can't reach the Triforce efficiently. But whilst there are a lot of fun elements here, the dungeon feels a little disjointed and incomplete. Other than the opening room, the dungeon lacks its own identity. There isn't any new item or power up, which is okay being the final dungeon, but I can't excuse the lack of a final boss. You could argue that the final Ghirahim fight is Skykeep's last hurdle, but as the battle takes place in a different location outside the keep, I'd say it's a bit of a stretch. There is Dreadfuse that acts as a mini-boss, but it's just a worse version of Skirvo, which makes the new pirate feel a little lackluster. If the Skykeep can house all these new enemies, then there's no reason why it couldn't have a final boss designed to test the hero one last time to ensure they're worthy of the Triforce. Still, I do admire what the keep was going for, and it does serve as a nice culmination of all the things you've achieved in the game. Skyview Temple is a great opening dungeon. It acts as a fantastic tutorial, giving you all the foundation skills needed for the rest of the game. The enemy variety here is excellent, providing many opportunities to practice slicing the sword and going for some stab attacks. It also encourages you to practice swimming to uncover paths, swinging to reach new locations, and spinning your sword to solve puzzles. The tutorial aspect is a little undermined given that you learn some of this from Farron Woods, but it's still a positive learning experience that's a lot of fun. But the compliments don't stop there. Skyview is one of the most beautiful locations in Skyward Sword, with the bright blues contrasting nicely to the mystique of the temple. The dungeon is an appropriate length, with an enjoyable balance of combat, puzzles and exploration, especially when you get the beetle in the second half of the dungeon and have a wide open space to put this new item to use. I don't hate any aspect of this opening level, but I do find that both the mini-boss and the dungeon soundtrack can be a little bland. It's also an opening dungeon, so it's limited to how difficult and complex it can be. Still, it does shake things up having you face off against the main antagonist right from the get-go. But I've spoken enough about that fight in my boss ranking video, so if you want to learn more about that, check out that video. All in all, Skyview Temple is a great opening dungeon that really sets the tone for the rest of the game. Lanayru mining facility comes after a lengthy stretch of trekking through the desert, and I can understand how this dungeon can feel like a chore to some players. It feels relatively long, it can get a bit confusing in parts, and it's similar to a lot of the pre-dungeon quests. But the dungeon takes all those aspects that were enjoyable in the lead up and amplifies them. The time shift stones create some of the most rewarding bits of gameplay, and it's really cool to see the interior and the music switch back from past and present. The robot enemies in the past provide some fun combat, and the puzzles are a really nice challenge. That said, there are aspects to this dungeon that aren't as pleasing. Certain portions of the game have you switching back and forth between times a little too much, such as when moving the carts. The dungeon item isn't the most exciting thing either, and if you're like me and feel the need to uncover every bit of surface, you're going to be stuck in the mining facility all day. At least you've got a fantastic theme to listen to, both in the main part of the dungeon and in the boss room. And whilst the Moldarach fight is just okay, the little sequence after is pretty mesmerising. An overall solid dungeon, but it doesn't quite hit the mark of a really solid top 3. The Earth Temple may surprise a few being this high up, but I think it's a fantastic dungeon. It's easily got the best theme of any dungeon or temple in Skyward Sword, and the introduction of the Lizalfos mini-bosses is one of the greatest scenes in all of the series. The second dungeon of the game is relatively short, and the main puzzles revolve around using bombs, digging up holes, and rolling around on a giant ball. All of these gameplay elements fit nicely, with none feeling overdone. To progress to the second half of the level, you need to take a look at your map to find cracks in the wall that would otherwise go unnoticed. It's an aspect I really appreciate, and it's nice to find the answer yourself rather than have a big arrow point out the obvious way to go. This dungeon also has one of the best closing sequences, with the race down the path to avoid a ball that ends up being the final boss. Speaking of which, Skaldera is a pretty enjoyable fight and a nice way to finish off a fiery level, one that I think is criminally underrated. The ancient Cistern is amazing. As you enter, you're greeted with this beautiful centerpiece, seemingly inspired by Buddha, surrounded by serene looking water and lovely lily pads. The dungeon can be seen as having two parts, the upper levels that continue this beautiful water theme, and the lower levels that represent a dark and ominous underworld filled with cursed enemies and hazards. The thematics of this dungeon are truly incredible, with one of my personal highlights being the rope climb to exit the underworld towards the end of the level. It seems to be inspired by the short story A Spider's Thread, which perhaps I might delve into in a future video. Most puzzles in here involve flipping things, whether it be the lily pads or the switches, and I think that it strengthens the duality aspects of this dungeon. The whip obtained in the ancient Cistern adds some enjoyable variety to combat and gameplay. It's used to swing across platforms, open gates, and grab and pull enemies and levers. It would have been interesting to see some more whip based enemies, but the dungeon more than makes up for that with Coloctus. Arguably the most popular boss in the entire series, Coloctus provides a fun battle like no other that perfectly encapsulates everything that makes the Zelda series the masterpiece that it is. In almost every other title, the Ancient Cistern would be the game's greatest dungeon, but there's another that just slightly pips it. It was an extremely close decision, but the Sandship takes out the title as best dungeon in Skyward Sword. It's an incredible level that combines all of these amazing gameplay elements with some beautiful thematics to make the perfect package. The most unique of these being that the dungeon isn't your typical temple or cave, but rather a ship. It also brings back the time shift stones, and it's a lot of fun to explore the vessel in both its past and present forms. Several puzzles require the use of the dungeon item, the bow and arrow, to snipe the soul stone that's located in the mast. I prefer this much more to any of the methods used in the earlier mining facility. It's also very rewarding to use the item, especially when sniping those pesky bokoblins. The Sandship also does a fantastic job of weaving in the stories of the local NPCs. A main objective of the level is to free the robots from captivity, and the puzzles and cinematics around these are much better than those in the Fire Sanctuary. And of course, there is Skervo, the devilish pirate who stole the Sandship in the first place. Other than Darkling from Ocarina of Time, it's hard to think of a more iconic mini-boss in the series. The Fiend even got its own first 4-figure statue, which is pretty impressive. The fight on the plank is an epic duel that lives long in the memories of any Skyward Sword fan. To finish this great experience, there's also that fantastic closing sequence with Tantalus's attack on the ship. I acknowledge that the sea monster's design isn't for everyone, but it provides an incredible boss battle to round out what I consider to be a perfect dungeon. But that's enough from me. I want to hear your dungeon rankings, so post them down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video. If you haven't already, it would be great if you could leave a like and share it with a friend. I still have a few more Skyward Sword specific videos planned before I move on to the next Zelda title. I'll also be posting a video or two on Pokemon Legends Arceus, so if any of those videos interest you, hit subscribe so you don't miss out. In the meantime, feel free to check out some of my other videos and follow me on TikTok and Instagram to see some plushies and figurines get up to random shenanigans. But until then, stay safe, stay kind, and I'll see you next time on the Hungry Heracross.